All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Purchasing Essentials training. Uh, so today we're going to get started with the agenda. And I'm not going to go through every item, but just so you know, we have a lot of areas and topics to cover today. So we're going to try to cover everything procurement. So feel free to ask questions along the way, but we will cover all of these different topics from overview of procurement, spend categories, supplier registration, all the way from requisitions, purchase orders, change orders, insurance, and everything in between. So first, we're going to start off with a procurement overview. So just a quick overview of BCN purchasing. So BCN stands for Business Center North. So our purchasing department serves all of the northern institutions, so 6 of them, including also the Nevada System of Higher Education offices and the System Computing Services. Um, we also at UNR have our central receiving and mail services, our surplus, and our copier program here at the University of Nevada, Reno. And we'll talk a little bit more about asset management and other areas along the way too. So if you haven't already, make sure you've bookmarked the BCN purchasing website. We will talk about that throughout the training today, but that's a good one to bookmark since we have our purchasing policies on there, information of who to contact for our buyers, and how to make sure you have all the information you need to know about purchasing. And just a quick procurement overview. So this is just an overview of all procurement in Workday. So the components that make up procurement are spend categories, work tags, supplier registration, procurement card, which you also known as P card, supplier invoice requests, requisitions, and purchase orders. A majority of this we will go over today on the areas that we handle in BCN purchasing. So now that we're done with a quick procurement overview, I'm going to pass it on to Sarah to be able to start us off with our spend categories topic.
Thanks, Desi. Okay, so now we're going to go into spend categories. For those of you that aren't familiar with them, these provide operational detail of expense activity that maps to an expense ledger account. And it is required on any operational transaction, so requisitions, invoices, expense reports. For our purposes, it also is used to determine trackable items that become fixed assets, as well as ones that are sensitive items like firearms or computers, laptops. The main thing to remember about a spend category when choosing one for a requisition is that it should be selected based on what is being purchased, not for what the reason is. So not the why or what it pertains to, but what it actually is. And that's really critical from a reporting side of things so that it's as accurate as possible. All right, moving on to the next one. So when you are choosing a spend category, make sure that you're choosing the appropriate one. There's quite a few different spend categories. So a good example that we try to use is if you're purchasing a laptop, there is a spend category specific for that. We wouldn't want to use something that was computer accessories or computer peripherals when purchasing something like that. Additionally, if you're not sure what to use and you just start typing in, one keyword into that search field, it is using AI learning and will give you some suggestions as to what category to use. We really recommend avoiding using anything that's miscellaneous or generic. So if you're not sure what to use, it's best to reach out to the appropriate buyer to discuss what it could be. And we do have a list of the spend categories, the full list and who's it's assigned to by spend category as well as by buyer, so you know who to reach out to. Or you can always email us at our main BCN email to get some advice. Additionally, don't choose a goods line when you're purchasing something that is for a service and vice versa. So if we are having painting services done, we wouldn't want to be putting that on a goods line. And the reason being that, like, again, it should be with what is being done. So similar to choosing a laptop, we wouldn't put that on a services line. Anything that has the incorrect spend category will be sent back for correction if it's not something our office can make the change. And what's driven with that is in Workday Tools, there is a ledgers field. I believe it's under, I can't recall, Desi, exactly what area. But you can check to see if the spend category is on a services ledger or what ledger it would be on. And let's say that we're doing, again, painting services as an example, but you choose the miscellaneous one that is just generic labor and installation. Those are on two different ledgers, so we wouldn't be able to make that change in our office, and we'd have to send the requisition back, which means it'd have to go all the way back to the start of routing. So that's why it is really critical that you do try to review, or like I said, be proactive and reach out to us ahead of time. So that way, if it's something urgent, it's not having to go all the way back through the approval process. Um, Workday Tools also lets you know whether a spend category is trackable. So that meaning if it's going to become something that's an asset. Again, here is a link to our spend category assignments and a link to Workday Tools as well. There was a question about should we be seeing the slides? Are you not seeing the shared screen? Can anybody confirm that? Oh, okay, somebody did say they could see it. Okay. All right, thank you. And again, we will have a recording available if you do miss anything. So again, this is what I was talking about with the suggested spend categories. It will bring some up that are the most commonly used ones. But once you start typing in there, it'll give you some more suggestions. And the more you start doing that, the more it learns. Sometimes newly created spend categories don't automatically pop up as something suggested. So that's why, again, reaching out to us or reviewing our spend category list is a more appropriate place to start. So again, if you put in something like repair, it will bring up all the spend categories that have repair in the title, and you can select the most appropriate option. But yeah, so moving on to the next slide.
Sarah, real quick, there
Yes,
was a question before the showing the slides. How about for something like catering? Is that service or is that food?
I believe we do have that as a service. And let me just double check that. Hold on one moment. Because food, there is actually a food spend category. So if, and that is a really good question. And this would kind of go along with other things that might have, I guess, goods as part of the service. So for instance, if you are paying for catering at, let's say, an offsite hotel, and we're paying to use the facility as well as the food that they're going to be catering, then you would use the catering and banquet services spend category. If we were only purchasing food, then you would use the food spend category on a goods line if there is no service associated. And then similarly, I will use like flooring for an example. We have a number of flooring contractors that when they submit a quote, they will line out like all the carpet that we're purchasing and then the service below that. Because those materials are needed as part of the service, that wouldn't need to be itemized. It would just be what we call like a lump sum bid because it is something that's like construction related. And we have a flooring services spend category that would be most appropriate to be on. So good question. All right, so now going into Workday Tools and how to use that. So for those of you that aren't familiar, Workday Tools is specific to UNR, and it's a web application where employees with a valid net ID can view, search, and download data from the finance module of Workday. So it has work tag information for programs, projects, gift accounts, and it shows who the signature authority is on that, but only at the manager and owner level. So if there are multiple people that have approval on a specific work tag, unfortunately, Workday Tools is only limited to showing those two people. It also lists all the spend categories that are available, detail codes, and ledger accounts. And we do have a knowledge base article linked here as well on how to use it. I do see another question in the chat. Hold on a moment. So if a vendor delivered but did not serve out or set up the display. Yeah, so for instance, we see a lot of requisitions for like a delivery for pizza. Yes, that would be food. And I will say, let me see here, banquet catering. But if they do set it up, then it would be, kind of use your discretion. It would be banquet catering services. And again, you can reach out to the buyer that would be most appropriate for that, which in this instance is Jen Jenisek. And she can kind of let you know and give you a guide as to what would be the best way to handle that.
Sarah, can I jump
Um,
in for a second?
yes.
One of the reasons, and Sarah will get to it pretty soon, one of the reasons we make such a distinction between goods and services is that services become a lot more complicated and we have to get insurance and things like that. When people are just dropping food off at the campus, there's not a big risk component to that. When they stay at campus and they are serving or setting up tables, then risk increases. So that's one of the reasons we make a distinction is it helps trigger us to get the right type of backup insurance or other things. And we'll get to that, but that's one of the reasons between making a distinction.
Correct. Thank you. And again, it's along the lines of looking at exactly what is being done. So thank you for that clarification, Adriel. Okay, and Desi did bring up Workday Tools, so you can kind of see, if you're not familiar with it, what it looks like. So this is the landing page where it has all the work tags, the account posting rules. So actually right here in the middle under account posting rules and spend, that would be where you would find out the correct ledger account that's like a spend category hits. So, and also here when you're going under for spend categories and wanting to know whether or not it's a trackable spend category, there is this column that we have highlighted that says yes, noting that it is a tracked item. So you will see that for like anything that's has equipment in the spend category name, for instance, would be tracked. And then all furniture is also considered a tracked spend category as well. Now with detail work tags, these are things that are typically used with purchases like hosting, travel, participant support, and grant equipment. And these are ones that the department may want, let's see, trying to think, department may want to use to track specific purchases. For grants, we have ones that something that's going to be capitalized, there's a detail work tag specific to that. And that, again, it's used for reporting purposes. Hosting detail codes and the table purchase spend category, I do want to make a special note that they cannot be used for state funds. All right, so now that we've covered spend categories, we're going to move into like how we would actually start the process of purchasing with a vendor. So we use a system, our Supplier Registration or SReg system, and this is specific to anybody we are actually going to pay at some point. We do not want to register anyone that, like, a lot of vendors are under the impression that they need to be registered in the system in order to do business with us, like to have the chance to do business. That is not the case. This is specifically the system that talks to Workday and allows us to make payments to a vendor. Now, you would want to reach out, like once you're getting quotes and you know somebody that you want to work with. If it's not someone that has already done business with us, they would need to complete their registration in SReg before you enter a requisition or a supplier invoice request to them. And that's because it does go through multiple phases of approval. The first phase one is by procurement. And that is to verify that everything is set up correctly. The biggest thing that we see hanging up an approval in that process is their W-9. We can only accept a W-9 that is on the most current IRS form. So anything that is older than, I believe it was March of 2024, will be kicked back and they will have to submit a current one on the current form. Once that piece has been approved, they move into phase 2 approval, which is done by accounts payable. And that's for them to verify that the information they entered on their W-9 matches the records with the IRS. If it doesn't, then it gets hung up there. And in both phases of that process, the people that are reviewing these account registrations will send the vendor back notes with what they need to do. And supplier update, if you see that phase status when you go to SReg, it's because there's something that supplier needs to do in order to complete their registration. So when you log into the SReg system, or sorry, when you actually just go to the page, you're pretty limited as to what you're able to see because you're not able to log in. So it's going to show you the name of the supplier and then it'll show their status. If it says anything other than accepted, there's something wrong with their account. And you can reach out to us, at our BCN purchasing email to inquire about the status of a registration if you need. And we do have a article as well about it on how to get somebody registered. We do have very thorough instructions with screenshots that we provide to people on how to get it moved along. And it's really not that hard. So I would say like the biggest thing is that W-9. So just to kind of keep that in mind when you're working with a new vendor. All right, so again, we do have help docs available on our website under the For Suppliers tab. And the thing about the SReg system is that this is a self-service system. So anytime a supplier needs to make a change, then they should be the ones logging in to do it. So for instance, if they have someone that is leaving the company and they want to change who can make changes to their account, or if they need to update banking information or change an email, then they need to log in to do that. I do want to note that because we work with suppliers that provide both goods and services, an accepted account in SReg only means that they are accepted in terms of us being able to make payments to them. It does not include any verification of insurance or license requirements. And so again, keeping in mind that we do business with just suppliers that provide goods, that's why we don't have that step in there, because we would never need insurance for someone we're just buying goods from. So those are things that are addressed separately by the assigned buyer once they get the requisition in Workday and they review it to determine if any of those things apply. So if you do have questions, anything that is supplier invoice related would be an accounts payable question. If it's something purchase order related, then Patrick Jackson is our SREG administrator and his email address is there. All right, so moving into asset management. So for those of you that aren't aware, in July, the asset threshold limit increased to $10,000. So anything past that date that is over 10,000 will become an asset. Anything that was prior to that date is still going to be at the previous asset threshold of $5,000. So there's nothing being changed retroactively due to that limit being increased. Asset is something that is a unit that we are overseeing through purchasing, and we're responsible for the proper tagging and reporting and control of all capital equipment and sensitive equipment for BCN. All of the asset management is done through AssetWorks, which is the fixed asset system. And if you have any questions specific to that, we do have the assets email because they do their own training related to asset management. But one note I do want to call out that if you do have a fixed asset that you want to surplus, that you would need to reach out to our asset team before you dispose of the item and request surplus to pick it up. Right. Now, surplus and how it relates to vehicle trade-ins. Wanted to do a specific section related to this. So first, I'm going to talk about asset donations, recycling, and disposal. All of these requests need to be processed by working with both our surplus and our assets department. Because if something is an asset and you're looking to donate it to an entity or you want to recycle it, we need to make sure that we're accounting for that within the asset system and then able to move it to surplus. So there is a procedure that it needs to follow appropriately for that. We are in the midst of kind of updating that policy and it will be shared soon. But if you have any specific questions related to surplus, you can reach out to them directly. As far as trade-ins, those all require prior approval. So you would need to email the assets team with the inventory tag number. Again, this is common with vehicles, and showing that what the trade-in amount is being offered. So that way they can review it and make sure that that's, like with Kelley Blue Book, a valid trade-in amount. Assets will verify the funds that were used for the original purchase and if the trade-in is allowable. This comes into play primarily with like federal funding to ensure that we're not violating the terms of our grant. For vehicles, the title will get pulled and prepared for the dealership, and assets works to cancel the insurance and registration once we have received the plates in our office. So one big reminder is that that is a critical piece of the process, is that the plates need to be removed and returned within 10 days of the new purchase and sent to assets. Otherwise, we can't move forward with getting it off as an asset. Okay, so moving into procurement options. We have two different slides related to a quick reference guide on thresholds. So this first guide that I'm going to review is anything that is not construction related. So anything under $5,000 that should be used on a P card, unless it is for something that is a service that would require insurance or licenses, or if it's on an ongoing purchase that should be on a blanket purchase order, with the exception of utilities. Anything that is between $5,000 and $24,999 would require a requisition and only requires one quote be attached, or we can tie it to an existing contract, whether that's one that is a result of a formal solicitation that our office has done, or through one of the cooperative organizations that we work with. While we do always encourage, though, multiple quotes just to get the best advantage for us financially, only one quote is required for that threshold. Now, for non-professional goods and services between $25,000 and $49,999, two quotes are required, or an approved competitive exception, or again, a contract that I just mentioned. For any non-construction professional services between 25,000 to 74,999, the same threshold applies. Now, I kind of want to give some examples in here. So for the non-professional goods and services that are between the 25 to 49,999, a good example would be, let's say janitorial services. So having two quotes for that. Now, for the threshold just underneath that of professional services, this would be something along the lines of like auditing, outside auditing or accounting services, consulting, business consulting services, would be a good example. And then anything that is more than 49,999 that is not construction related, those do need to go out for formal solicitation, and that's Board of Regents policy. Or depending on what is being procured, could be put on an existing cooperative contract or one that we've formally solicited. And we do have a link to this guide in our knowledge base as well for your reference. So it's something that you could have, kind of posted to your desk to just have as a reminder. Now, for anything construction related, and I will go into this in more detail a little bit further on to the presentation. These are specific thresholds that are dictated by NRS. For those of you who don't know what that is, it is Nevada Revised Statutes. So anything between 25,000 to 99,999 requires 3 competitive quotes. So that would be things like painting, flooring, HVAC, like anything that requires a contractor's license. So a lot of people think construction related and think we mean a renovation or the building of a new building. That's not the case. It's anything that requires a contractor's license to perform. And similarly with any architecture and engineering services, we require that we evaluate 3 firms for that because we are not permitted to award those based on lowest price. Now, anything that is over 99,999 that is construction related or architect and engineering services, those need to be formally solicited. Let's see. I actually might kick this question to Adriel that's in the chat, but it's a question about the UAM because we did recently update the UAM, Adriel,
Okay, no problem. We
was
actually
not more in line with our guidelines as it was with some other changes that were made.
We sent updates for the UAM. I don't think they've been applied yet. There's a very lengthy process for updating the UAM that involves, I forget what, I think it might be the faculty senate or something like that. So I don't think it's up to date.
And we submitted that quite a while ago.
Yeah, so I think probably it's best to stick to purchasing guidelines. And you can always email me or someone at purchasing also just for the most up to date. Even like the Board of Regents policy handbook is constantly under minor updates. So we stay on top of those here and you're welcome to ask us. But I don't believe, I'll go look again, but I'll go look at and see if they updated. I don't think they've updated. They usually notify me when updates are made.
Yeah, and our purchasing guidelines are in line with Board of Regents policy and with NRS, so they are the more current. They would always be the more current reference than UAM, just because if there is a change that the Board of Regents makes, and then we do have to submit it to get updated in the UAM, as Adriel said, I mean, it's been months, I think, since we sent those. So
yeah, and it looks like the last update was 2021, so it has not been updated.
Yeah, but thank you for the question. All right, so moving on to one of the first options for procurement, which is the supplier invoice request or SIR. So we recommend using the SIRs for any small dollar transactions where the vendor doesn't accept a P card and or no tangible goods or services are being received. So an example would be utility payments, memberships, certifications, permits, fees. Those are all appropriate uses, and we do have a link to that in the knowledge base here. And they should be used on an exception-only basis, and you really should be following the thresholds, on the prior slide, where if you're able to use a P card or a requisition as much as possible. But here's a list of what they shouldn't be used for. So anything that's over 5,000, so anything over the P card limit, anything where you should be using a P card, software maintenance agreements, ongoing purchases that should be on a blanket purchase order, any transactions that have an associated contract, if you're reimbursing an employee or student, if you're paying a guest speaker or an independent contractor, or if you're purchasing goods and services. So those should all be on a requisition. So again, but I feel like we do see quite a few requisitions come through for certifications and memberships and permits. And those, because the requisition goes through the approval process, I want to throw that out there and really call it out that you can use SIRs for that because we really don't add any value to that piece of the process. And so it going through the approval phase it's taking time that you guys don't necessarily need to wait on in order to pay those. Let's see. Can we pay student participants on grants? That wouldn't be necessarily a question for us in terms of like what funds you're using. Let's see. Oh, stipend payments. I think we do. Desi, will you actually keep a note of that question and we'll circle back to answer that one because that one I'm not 100% sure on, Brendy. Okay, moving on to requisitions. All right, so there are several different types of requisitions that you can enter in Workday. So the two primary ones are goods and services and open-ended blanket purchase orders. We also have guest speakers and independent contractors. And it is really important that you choose the most appropriate requisition type because our office can only change between goods services and open-ended if those come in incorrectly. We cannot change from a good service to a guest speaker or an IC or vice versa because the business process in the background is completely different and they won't route appropriately. So we also can't even send those back and have you change the type. They have to be completely canceled and started over in order to refresh that process. So the requisition type determines how you're going to be able to receive it. So if you're purchasing goods only, so equipment or materials, those are tangible items that you're going to be receiving and should be received by quantity of what you're purchasing. Services are not tangible and are received by dollars. So that's the difference in how those lines look. With services, it would be those always are going to require that we check for insurance if it's going to be provided on niche-owned property. And it needs to be current and on file with us before a vendor can come onto campus. We do encourage you, if you're not sure whether or not insurance will be required, to reach out to risk management directly ahead of time, because otherwise that's something that is going to hold up the processing of a requisition if our office has to reach out to them, which I will go over insurance in much more detail later on. So I just want to throw that piece out there. With blanket purchase orders, this is for ongoing purchases. So let's say that you have a janitorial service that happens monthly. That would be considered an ongoing service and should be on a blanket for, a specific amount of time, whether that's for the fiscal year or calendar year. And it's based on an estimate of the annual spend if you don't have a hard quote. So let's say with janitorial, in most cases, you would have like a set amount. Let's say it's $1,000 a month. So you would know what you're supposed to spend unless you wanted to cushion it with like any, deep cleaning or something like that, then you would add a little bit more. With other things like, let's say that it was for janitorial supplies and you would base that on an estimate of what you've spent in the past, or just your best estimate is what you should be encumbering on those requests. And the difference with blanket purchase orders as well is that those always have to be on a services line, regardless of what you're purchasing, because it's going to be by amount and because you don't know what you're going to be getting. With independent contractors and guest speakers, those are going to be used, and that's how they're registered in SREG is either an individual sole proprietor or a single member LLC. That's what determines whether they're an independent contractor or not. And it is really important that you check SREG if that's not something you're already aware of when the vendor goes to register. We do check it on our side, and we actually do have a change soon to come where when you go to enter a requisition, if you enter in someone who is set up as an individual sole proprietor, it's going to give you a hard error and it will not let you continue. It won't even let you submit your requisition. So that way it's entered on the appropriate requisition type. There are also additional requirements for ICs and guest speakers that need to be completed ahead of time before we process, and that is the independent contractor agreement or the guest speaker forms. Those need to be completed and attached to the requisition once it comes through. And also with independent contractors, with the insurance component on that piece, that needs to be approved by risk management also before it's sent through on a requisition. All right, so I'm not going to go over this piece in detail, but this is information that you should have ready before you enter a requisition. We do have links to different articles on how to create requisitions for goods specifically, for services, for BPOs, for ICs, and also how to process supplier deposits. So this is a nice little list of all of the things to kind of have ready before you submit a requisition. Amber, as far as risk management being added to the routing, I don't believe that's going to happen with them being in the approval process. It's just part of the process at this point that they have to review the insurance first. But I can always check to see if that's still a discussion item. I just think that it might, I don't know that that would be the best path to have them added in that process, but that's also not up to our office. I think I did actually see somebody from Risk on this call, but I'll ask and check and see if that's something that they're interested in. But we are exploring some other options as well related to our supplier registration system, like moving away from SREG. So there might be some changes related to some of these processes later on that we'll pass along to everyone if that happens. Okay. So some other key things to keep in mind when you're submitting a requisition. You want to make sure that you have all of the backup documentation that's required for your purchase attached. So if it's just one quote, if it requires multiple quotes, you want to have all of that attached. If you're requesting a competitive exception sole source, that is completed and signed and contains a justifiable reason for the sole source. An unsigned contract, as our office is responsible as the signature authority for all contracts. A signed hosting form, a print release if it's required, and please attach as separate documents because some of these things like the quotes and contracts will eventually be forwarded to the supplier, but the others are internal only. Any equipment orders that are going to become assets or sensitive equipment need to be ordered by quantity and they cannot be split. So that is something you will have to remember that if you're trying to split it by multiple accounts, that's something that's going to have to be done on the back end after the purchase order is processed. And you always want to use each as the unit of measure as opposed to trying to lump it all together. These orders should be itemized to match the quote. Also using the internal and supplier memo fields for the buyer and the supplier. So a good example would be if the order requires a deposit. That would be something that you should put in the internal memo field. So it's calling out to the buyer that a deposit is required. And we also use this as the mechanism for approval from whoever the work tag manager is that approved the requisition, that they also saw that note and approved the deposit. Because we don't pay deposits as much as we can get away from it unless a supplier really requires it. And so having that in there gets us that approval without having to email for it separately once we see a requisition. For any software purchases, they need to follow the accessibility guidelines that we have linked here. Those do all route to IT and Workday ahead of time before they get to our department. So that way we already have the accessibility approval before we process. For Costco and Home Depot, they unfortunately do not accept purchase orders. So it's just a reminder not to enter them on a requisition. And also please do try not to split lines. If you're needing to split the cost between multiple accounts, a good example would be on a blanket purchase order. Please just enter separate lines in Workday because it does not work well with splits, even though it's an option. And it becomes really difficult for us to process a change order later on when there are splits on one line between multiple accounts. And also just a reminder not to add more than one supplier to a requisition either. So this slide is going to be specific to freight. So for freight that is not related to the purchase of an asset, this would be entered on a service line, and we have the spend category here for inbound freight listed. For setup or labor and installation charges that also are not related to an asset, those should also be entered on a separate service line. And just a reminder, you can have both goods and service lines on one PO. So if you're buying, let's say furniture is a good example. We often have multiple lines for the different types of furniture that we're buying, and then we will have a separate line for the labor and installation, and maybe even a separate line for the design services if they had to do drawings or something like that. Those would be on separate service lines. And we have the spend category listed. Now, if there is freight or setup and installation charges that are for an asset, this is the only time you're going to use the freight and other charges fields that are available in the checkout screen. This allows those charges to be equally charged against all of the work tags that you're using. So if you only want freight to be charged to one account, you would need to add that in the memo field and then add a separate line for freight to charge to the appropriate account. I really want to call out not using the freight and other charges fields for anything else. We will send it back and have you enter them on separate lines because we have a number of vendors, for whatever reason, will charge freight separately from the goods. And there's no way for AP to pay an invoice when the charge is only in that field. So just a reminder, that will be something that would cause your requisition to get delayed if we have to send it back. But we do have a job aid here linked if you have any questions about how to enter freight. All right, now one that has come up this year with tariffs. For UNR, we are trying to track any tariff-related fees, and there is an activity code here that we have listed that we want that we will need to have on a line. So the best way for this to be entered is you would put whatever you're actually purchasing. So let's say that we're purchasing some lab equipment, and there's a tariff fee that's associated with that. You're still going to enter the most appropriate spend category for what that tariff is related to. So you would still use like laboratory equipment, but then on the work tag column, that's where you would add this activity code so we can track that fee. Let's see, if the tariffs are not clearly listed, because we've seen a number of different ways that they've defined this, it might say like import fee. Trying to think of some other weird ones we've seen, like just some that are just not obviously tariffs, but if it seems like it could be, then you need to contact the supplier and just get some clarification on what it is so that way we can verify that's what the fee is. And there is actually a tariff exemption request form that we've become aware of from some suppliers, and it is available to academia to request an exception. And we have a link to the PDF here as well on how to do that. That's something that needs to be done and applied for before we actually receive, I believe before they come into the country, at the very least before we actually receive the delivery. Otherwise, they won't do an exemption for the tariff. All right, now moving into emergency purchases. So emergency purchases of goods or services can be approved when there is a current threat to the health, safety, or welfare of the public. So any emergency request, so let's say that we have a flood or we need, let's see, I'm trying to think of another example. I feel like flooding is the most common, especially right now since we're going to be getting a lot of rain. That should be submitted via email to both myself and Melanie Lever, our director. So that way we're aware of the request ahead of time, and we can verify that insurance and licenses are current and on file for anybody, like let's say that it's a remediation contractor. We'll reach out at that time to obtain insurance or licenses if we need to, but we'll give conditional approval via email for the work to commence. Even though the quote may not be available. So if you guys are letting us know that you want to have somebody come out to deal with the emergency right then, we verify it, we give that approval, and that email should be uploaded once you actually have an invoice later on. But I do want to be very clear that NRS is very specific as to what constitutes an emergency. So it's, again, current threat to the health, safety, or welfare of the public. Once the requisition is Workday, like I said, a copy of the email approval from us should be attached along with the final quote or invoice for the goods and service. And I really strongly, want to just emphasize having that email approval on there because there have been times where it could be weeks or even like up to a month or two before you receive the invoice. And we may not remember that it was an emergency. And if that's not listed in there, sometimes the admins that are entering the requisitions on behalf of the original requester may not know that it was an emergency. And so then we may inquire why this was done after the fact. So that's why it's helpful to kind of speed along the process and ensure that we're getting suppliers paid if we just have all of that relevant documentation attached to a requisition. Okay. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this app in Workday, there is a Requisitions app that you can add to your dashboard. And it shows you any requisitions that you have entered. So you wouldn't be able to see this for anybody else in your department, but just for yourself. So it is an optional app that you can get to from the main menu in Workday. And we do have information here on how to access it. But it's really a great way for you to monitor your requisition queue, especially at fiscal year end when maybe you're entering a lot of blanket purchase order requisitions and you want to track where they're at in the approval process. It'll show you if it's been approved, and then if you were to drill down with these arrows, it'll show you if it's been moved to a purchase order, and then eventually it'll also show you if it's been receipted and invoiced, and it'll have the clickable links to those related tasks in Workday so you can see where it's actually at, as well as reviewing which ones have been fully completed. So it is a really useful tool to track it when you have a lot going on. All right. Now we're going to move into the purchase order process. So this is a nice little roadmap of start to finish, how we get to a purchase order. So obtaining the initial quote from a supplier, getting them registered in SREG, creating the requisition, it routes for the necessary work tag approvals, and then it comes into our queue for review. At that point, the buyer is reviewing that you've attached all of the relevant documentation, whether or not it needs insurance, and they're initiating that request on our side. Once we have everything that we need, then we process the purchase order. Then it moves on to you being able to track when that's been issued, which it gets issued every night in a mass issuance. Then once you receive the goods or services, you create that receipt. It routes to AP, where you have to have the invoice attached. And then if it's been fully receipted and paid, Workday automatically closes it. If for whatever reason you do receipt less than, and that's the less than the original purchase order, and you're not going to be using it anymore, that would be an instance where you'd have to reach out to our office to close and disencumber those funds because Workday won't automatically do it. All right, so there are some different ways to track your purchase order. The main one, again, was using that Requisitions app because it'll link to the purchase order once that's been processed. But you will receive a notification if you were the original requester once it's been issued. If somebody has left your department or they've left campus entirely and the requester needs to be changed on any purchase orders, please email the buyer that processed the purchase order first, or if you're unsure, you could reach out to our main email. And we can do a mass change on our side to somebody if we need to. And yes, I see a question in the chat about requesting the closure of a PO. Yes, you would want to reach out to the buyer that's listed on the PO and they can close it. And I do have another slide related to this, so I'll go into more detail on that when I get to that point. Another way to track your purchase order is the Requisitions worklet. You can also go to your archive. That's one of the options listed when you're in your inbox. You can have it favorited, and then we have some links to useful reports as well. All right, so ways to check if a purchase order has been paid. So you would want to go to the purchase order directly, and right at the top, which we have highlighted here, it's going to show you what the invoice status is. So if it doesn't have the invoice status or receiving status even populated and it just says issued, then nothing has been done to this purchase order related to that. So it'll show you whether it's been partially paid, partially received, fully paid, fully received. Once it shows both those statuses, the status will change from issued to closed. So if you do need something reopened, like let's say that your estimated amount maybe was too low on a blanket, for instance, then all you need to do is just email the buyer that processed your purchase order. They can reopen it and process a change order to increase it if needed. You would also, once you're in the purchase order, review the balances tab to see if there's anything remaining to be paid on the PO. You can also scroll down to the specific service or goods line to check if it's been paid. And you can click on the related actions of that supplier invoice to navigate to that specific invoice to see if it's still pending or has been paid. And you can also click on the Payments tab to find out how it was. So cost center managers can run this uninvoiced purchase orders report as well, just to see what may still be pending. Right. All right, now moving on to how to create receipts. So receipts need to be created in Workday in order to show that goods have been received or services have been completed. So the people who can create a receipt are the original requisition requester or the financial administrative assistant, the FAA for that cost center. It indicates, again, whether the goods or services have been completed, and it does require that a supplier invoice be uploaded and attached. It won't allow you to move on without that. And then once submitted, that receipt goes to AP for review and approval to create the supplier invoice from. Let's see, there was something I just remembered. Okay, here we go. So if you try to create a receipt, whether you go to create receipt in the search bar in Workday or you go to that specific PO and try to receipt it and it doesn't let you, it's more than likely because there's already a draft receipt created that somebody kind of forgot about. And that either needs to be edited or canceled if you need to start a new one. I do want to note that our office does cancel all draft receipts on a monthly basis. So anything that is in draft for the prior month will be canceled. So if you see my name as someone who canceled a receipt in the process history for one, that's why. I didn't like unless somebody asked me to, and it shows that it was a part of a mass process, that's what it was caught in. It was just because it was sitting out there and nothing had been done on it. Also, when you're creating a receipt, you should not receive any more than the amount that was established on the purchase order. So if you are going to go over what was originally on the PO, then you should be reaching out to the buyer to initiate a change order. And if we receive from AP, we will get a supplier invoice match exception if somebody does try to go over the established amount on a PO, and we'll advise them to cancel that and have you request a change order. So again, this will be with ones, for instance, if it's for a good service and let's see, that there was like an additional order that we weren't aware of for equipment or something like that, or if there was freight, like a pretty sizable amount for freight that needs to be added, then we'll send that back to have a change order done, as well as for a blanket purchase order. Especially if it's set up for the full fiscal year and we're like mid-year and you're going over that amount, then we're going to have you initiate a change order to bump that estimate up. We do have the KB article here for creating a receipt linked as well. Okay, now moving on to change orders. So we no longer use the change order request form. It's basically, we're just trying to streamline processes and make things more efficient. So email is sufficient. If you need to increase funds, change a work tag, that can all be done via email and should be approved by an individual with signature authority for that specific work tag. So if you're not sure who has that specific authority, you can check Workday Tools. Again, that is limited to the manager and the owner for those different work tags, but that should just be on the email trail before it comes to our office. So if you obtain that approval, then that's what we'll use to attach to the purchase order when we're processing it. We do not need email approval when we're decreasing funds or to close a PO. And that's because we're not committing the university to any more money. So that's why we need it specifically when we're increasing or changing work tags. We need to have that approval for that piece because we are encumbering funds. Now, backup documentation for increasing funds is needed on all good service POs. So if, like I had mentioned before, we're ordering like an additional piece of equipment or more furniture than we thought, then there should be an updated quote or an invoice that came in higher or an invoice that's showing that it's charging freight as the documentation that you're including on that email to the buyer. If the request that you send over to us exceeds a certain threshold, like those ones that I went over in an earlier slide that requires additional quotes, then we will need documentation showing other quotes were solicited, or the existing PO may be able to be linked to an existing contract or a cooperative contract. Or we may require a competitive exception if a sole source can be justified. All right, so here's an example of how to request a change order. And I'm sure I probably have some facilities folks actually in here, and I stole this from them, but this is a really good example of just how brief it can be in an email. And again, this should all be, excuse me, this should all be routed for the appropriate approval before you send it to the buyer. So having here, for instance, exactly how much money needs to go from one work tag to another and what the PO amount is going to end up being. They've listed the purchase order number, who the buyer was, who the vendor was, what line we're changing, what the previous work tag was, and what the new work tag is going to be. And if, let's say that the person with signature authority is different on each of those work tags, we would need approval from the new work tag manager or owner in order to encumber the funds on that account. Let's see, again, once we get this request, if there are any attached documents that I mentioned on the previous slide, this will all be the things that we will upload to the PO's backup documentation for the request. And if you need, again, this reference, we do have a nice KB article linked here as well. Okay, I'm going to take a pause for a second before I go into insurance requirements because it's going to be a lengthy section. Okay, so moving on to insurance. So first, I want to say that purchasing is the middleman between the vendor and risk management. So it's our office's responsibility to ensure compliance with the insurance requirements that are dictated by risk management. And insurance is required for any service that is provided on niche-owned property and needs to be current and on file before any work starts. Now, this could also apply to remotely provided services, because depending on the service that's being provided, there may still be risk associated with that. So for instance, if we're getting outside legal services or consulting services, they may require professional liability insurance. And again, these are all things that we would recommend you reach out to risk ahead of time if you're not sure whether something you're going to be purchasing is going to have an insurance requirement or not. Because we also do have some vendors that, depending on how big or small their company are, obtaining insurance to comply with our standards might be something that is costly to them. So it may be something that they need to increase their quote in order to satisfy that requirement. Or if they're requesting that we accept lower limits than what our standards are, those are things that can only be approved or waived by risk management. Our office cannot approve or waive any of those. So the standard minimum insurance requirements that are required for anybody coming on campus are general liability, business auto liability, and workers' compensation. For workers' compensation, if it's a sole proprietor IC, if they're the only people that work for their company, they don't have any employees, then there is an affidavit of rejection of workers' comp because they wouldn't have to carry it for just themselves that they can submit to us as well. Any professional services require professional liability insurance. Software or financial program services would require cyber liability or technology errors and omissions. Others, like certain special services, may be required. So if you're having let's say, an AC unit repaired on the roof of your building and they have to use a scissor lift to access it, that has a special insurance requirement. If we're going to be using, let's say, I'm trying to think of another one. A crane is a good example of, like, if they needed to lift up a piece of equipment on top of the building, that has another type of insurance. So these are all kind of things to be aware of that our buyers will be reviewing when they get the requisition if this is not something that has been addressed ahead of time. Also, niche always has to be named as additionally insured with endorsements. And we have a link to risk management's insurance requirements, as well as a KB article on obtaining insurance. And again, we have risk's email here listed as well in case you want to reach out to them with any specific questions. Moving on to the next slide. So the way that we ensure we have insurance on file is through our MyCOI system. So this is an online portal that is also self-service, and it's responsible for tracking and verifying that the certificate of insurance meets the requirements that are specified with BCN or within the contract. So for instance, if none of the insurance requirements were addressed ahead of time and we get a requisition for a service that requires it, we are going to submit a request via the MyCOI system to the vendor. And the department will always be copied on these requests, so you're aware that's what's holding up the processing of your requisition. What happens is the initial request just goes to the vendor to give us their insurance carrier's email information. So that's all we're actually asking from the vendor, because the insurance requests are going to go straight to their carrier because they know exactly what we're asking for. They know what an accord form is. They know what endorsements are. They know what additional insured language is. So those will all be submitted through the MyCOI system. What it does is it'll also ping them if they don't upload it quickly. It's going to send them reminders. And I believe Adriel or Desi, can you correct me? What is the length of time we're allowing now? Like up to how many weeks?
For the insurance to be
Yes,
compliant.
before it dies.
Oh, 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay. So if nobody has taken any action in MyCOI for 2 weeks, then we'll send a requisition back to the department, and you will need to work with your vendor to try to get them to submit the insurance that we require for them to do business with us.
Sarah, can
But
I jump in for just a second?
uh-huh.
During that time, we generally have the buyers reaching back out to the department, so you should be updated and knowing that there's no response happening yet. We don't send, it shouldn't be a surprise when the requisition gets sent back. There would be previous communications between us and you, letting you know that they're not responding. Because oftentimes the supplier is more responsive to the department because that's the person they know at the university. And so we try to loop the department in to help escalate things when things are not moving in MyCOI.
Thank you for that. And I do want to note that if you're working with a specific person, that's something that would be great to note in the internal memo field on the requisition, because especially if it's a bigger company, the person who's receiving like a copy of the PO, for instance, it may not be the same person that you're working with. Like it could be a different sales rep. And so if we don't have a contact name on the backup documentation that comes with the requisition, so like let's say that there's no like sales rep that's listed on the quote, then we're going to default to what's listed in SREG for who to start with to obtain insurance, and that might not be the appropriate person. So it's always useful for us for you to include that information so that way we can expedite the request as much as possible. I will say that we have been in the system for quite some time now, so we have a lot of suppliers registered in there and compliant. And even with some new requests, it's really dependent on the vendor and their carrier. If they're responsive, we can get compliant insurance same day we request it. Other times, if they're not really sure what we're asking for and they just don't provide the carrier information, then that can delay things. But again, we provide as much support as we can with navigating that system. Kenna White is our administrator for MyCOI. And is really helpful trying to work with people on how to get that uploaded. And I do want to say that the beauty of the system is once we do get compliant insurance, it's tracking all of the expiration dates for the different policies that they hold, and it will send them reminders. I think it starts at least a month out of, hey, this is coming up for expiration and you need to upload a renewal certificate. So in theory, if they stay on top of all of this, we would never have lapsed insurance, and we should always have current insurance for these suppliers.
Can I jump in one more time, Sarah?
Yep.
One big exception we actually have for MyCOI right now is when cyber liability insurance is required. MyCOI is not capable of uploading and tracking that or requesting that through the system. And so if you're purchasing software directly, or if you're purchasing services that include anything that has data transfer, online component, software involved. So for instance, I processed recently a marketing purchase that was generally about marketing services for the school business, but it included an online portal and potential student data exchange. And so all of that requires cyber liability. So anytime you're purchasing something that contemplates sensitive data exchanged in any way, it requires cyber liability. When that happens, the buyer for that requisition is going to reach out to you to request insurance directly from the supplier and coordinate that with risk. Risk management's requirements for cyber liability vary a bit, and we don't have a good handle on those exact requirements here at purchasing. So anytime cyber is required, it's going to be a manual request and working with risk management to verify the certificates meet what they need. And once all that approval is done, you would send it to the buyer. It's like an email from risk. It's not super formal. An email from risk, a copy of the approved certificates, and then those get uploaded and processed. We hope that this won't be the way things are for the long time future, but for right now, if your purchase contemplates any data exchange at all, it's going to require cyber liability insurance, and that cyber liability insurance has to be requested manually outside of the COI.
Thank you for that ad, Adriel. Appreciate that because I do forget about that. Okay, so I want to give you guys some visuals on why insurance is required. And these came from risk management for actual claims that have happened. So at the Honor Court, we had a catering truck that hit the top section of the Honor Court granite and caused it to collapse. It resulted in a property claim of $56,000, and it took a year to have the replacements cut and engraved and set up again. So because we had insurance for the catering services company, we were able to subrogate against their auto liability policy, and the UNR Foundation didn't have to pay any repairs or any deductible. So this is a good example of why we request and require business auto liability insurance. Now, moving on to another example, we had a FedEx delivery where the FedEx truck was sliding down a grassy hill and almost getting closer and closer to Manzanita Lake. And a semi truck had to be called in to pull the truck out. So this is one where we had to file a claim to repair the landscaping against their auto liability insurance. And I mean, luckily nobody was hurt. It was just minimal damage to the grass. But again, this is a great example of why we require auto liability insurance. And then this is an example with a truck for DRI that was doing field work. The vehicle had caught on fire due to grass and brush that was lodged up in between the engine and the skid plate, causing it to catch on fire. And we were able to, this was covered through the self-insurance program, and it was a $60,000 loss. So, but there is a reason why risk requires all of this. And again, it's just to protect our interests at the university and where we're not having to come out of pocket to replace or repair things that are damaged by one of the vendors we work with. All right, so moving on to licenses and certifications and when these are required. So anybody that is doing business in the state of Nevada as far as services is required to have a state of Nevada business license and on sam.gov. So we have a link to the Secretary of State's business license search where you can search if an entity has an active business license. And we do have this as a requirement in our niche PO terms and conditions. Excuse me, we have the verbiage that is noted here, where their acceptance of the PO is that they hold a valid Nevada state business license or that they're not required to pursuant to a specific NRS. I want to emphasize that our office cannot waive the requirement for a business license. That is strictly something that is managed by the Nevada Secretary of State and would have to be obtained through their office. So any purchase that exceeds the $25,000 threshold, Board of Regents policy requires that we verify at that threshold that they hold a valid and current license. But I do want to emphasize that they are required to have one for any amount of service. It's just that it's at that threshold that board guidelines require we verify it. We also have to verify that they have not been suspended, debarred, or ineligible from entering into contracts. And that's why we use sam.gov to check for that as well. Or that they're in receipt of a notice of proposed debarment from any federal or state agency. So again, we have those linked here if you wanted to check ahead of time before working with a supplier. Because this is something that can hold something up. If we go to verify it, we can't have them start work with us if this isn't in place. All right, now when a contractor's license would be required. So as I said before, a lot of people think that construction related work is just related to building a new building or doing a renovation, but we consider anything that's construction related, anything that requires a contractor's license to perform. We have a link here to the Nevada State Contractors Board website where you can search if a particular contractor has an active license and what type of license, as well as a link to the different license classifications. We also have a KB article related to this as well to kind of give you an idea of what stuff might require it. So a good example would be any renovation work, flooring, painting, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, furniture installation where it's going to be like screwed into the floor wall or like cubicles that have electrical running through it, any signage, landscaping, fencing, fire protection services, those all require a contractor's license. And we will verify that before we process a purchase order. It needs to be current and valid before work can commence. And again, that's not something that is our requirement. That is a NRS requirement. So we have to comply with that. All right, moving on to what is linked to this as well is the State Public Works bidder qualification. So if work requires a contractor's license, then it's also going to require that they be qualified through State Public Works. We have a link to the public list as well as a link to the disqualified contractors list through the Labor Commissioner's Office. Again, this is something that is required regardless of dollar amount and is actually required prior to us soliciting a quote. Again, this is an NRS requirement and it needs to be on file prior to work commencing. The beauty of the qualified bidders list is that it does go hand in hand with our contractor's license where it's good for 2 years. And they have a pretty straightforward application process, which can be accessed through the same link. But there's 2 different applications, one that is for projects less than $100,000 and one's for above. Let's say that you're working with an independent contractor or a smaller contracting company, and they're going to be doing work for $20,000. We've never done work with them before, and we need to get them bidder qualified. They can fill out that $100,000 application form, which is literally 1 page. It's basically their contact information and them signing a form and submitting it. And we do have good contacts there that process these applications that can turn around one pretty quickly if we needed to. And then for some of the bigger companies, if they want to fill out the one higher than that, because then they're only qualified to bid technically on works up to that amount. That's a more comprehensive application that requires a lot more documents. But one way that I always let them know, this is not just our requirement, because this is an NRS statute, it's required to do work with any public agency. So if they get qualified, it just opens them up to more potential for other work. So it's not just for niche business. Oh, and thank you, Desi, for the corrected link for that piece. Let me see. Just reviewing something before I move on to the next slide. Okay, so requisitions greater than 50,000. Okay, so it depends on what's being purchased in terms of being required to follow the formal bid solicitation or a competitive exception route. And whether it's handled by the requester or the admin submitting the rec, it would need to be, if you're requesting a competitive exception, then yes, that should be attached to the requisition by whomever, whoever is submitting that ahead of time. You can also always email us if you're wanting us to review a competitive exception. You can email us before you enter the requisition, and we can tell you whether or not it's something that's going to have to be formally bid or not. And what do you mean by, I'm going to need some clarity on where you can find the RFQ process readings. And you can unmute as well if that's quicker. Are you talking about the thresholds? Oh, okay. We had that linked but Desi might be able to pull that up and throw it in chat, but we do have the procurement, that quick reference guide that has the different thresholds listed, and it is in the knowledge base. Thank you. Okay. So for architect and engineering services, these do require specific licenses, and we do have links to the appropriate boards where you can search if somebody is qualified. And again, this is something that we have to verify is current before work commence and has to be on file. So you would be able to check this ahead of time. All right, now I'm going to kick it off to Adriel to cover contracts, but just really quick, I want to kind of check. I know that was a lot of information to throw at you. Is there anybody else that has any questions right now, or we can wait till the end? Either way. Okay, I'll let Adriel take it over.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Okay, we're going to talk about contracts for a minute, particularly purchasing contracts. We do have other contracts get thrown our direction, but we are only authorized to sign purchasing contracts, which means we're paying a supplier money to do something. Not we're getting paid, that's a different department, and not zero consideration or zero money contracts. But if you have anything you're going to purchase that comes with a request to sign something, that's a contract. So contracts are sometimes called contracts, they're sometimes called agreements, they're sometimes called purchase orders. They're quotes that require a signature and have some fine print. Anything that has terms and conditions where we're required to sign is a legally binding contract. So the biggest clue for you is if your signature is demanded, it is a contract, whether it looks like an invoice or anything else. So from this is a quote from the General Counsel's office pages on contracts. So, contract is an agreement between two or more persons or entities which creates an obligation to do or not do a particular thing. And it's important to define this because the Board of Regents has very strict rules on who is authorized to sign on behalf of the Board of Regents, which is our legal entity. So any contract we sign has to be under the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education. For UNR, it's the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education on behalf of the University of Nevada, Reno. But it always has to say the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education. That is our legal entity name. And that's the only way we can make a legally binding contract between us and another supplier. And in purchasing, we are delegated to sign for purchases. We can sign internally up to $1 million. Each institution president that we work with, so for here at UNR, President Sandoval can sign up to $3 million. After that, it has to go to the chancellor's office. So let's see. So I want to talk for a moment about cooperative agreements. If you have a large purchase you're contemplating in the future, please reach out to myself or BCM Purchasing inbox to just let us know what you're looking into and up for, because along with those competitive thresholds, we do have cooperative agreements that have already met the competitive requirements for purchasing, and it can both expedite your purchase process and also get us better terms or pricing than maybe you would find on your own. So if you reach out to us, there are a lot of cooperative contracts available. They don't require us to go out to bid, even if you spend, say, $200,000. You don't have to get extra quotes. You don't have to keep looking. If you use one of the cooperative contracts, they were already bid by someone else in government, and we're allowed to latch ourselves onto that contract and consider it competed. So those are really good resources for you, and they often come with better terms that protect us as an entity better than the contract that the supplier would directly hand to you. So if you have a big purchase coming up like office supplies, security services, anything like that, please reach out to us in advance, because if you don't have to go with a particular supplier, or even if you do have a particular supplier in mind, they might actually be on a cooperative contract. So all that to say, if you're purchasing something big, reach out. We might have some better solutions than going out to bid. And I apologize, this is wordy. I'm going to be updating this hopefully soon. But so if a supplier sends you a contract to sign before they'll do business, it doesn't matter how nice and detailed the contract is, the amount determines what rules apply. So if it's over 50,000, then it would still be under competitive bidding rules. You'd have to do an RFP for that. You can't just sign the contract, or you'd have to get a competitive exception. All of those things still apply to any contract. The first rule for you is read the contract. The department is the one responsible. Your department will be fiscally responsible for the contract, even though you're not the authorizing signature on it. By you sending it and requesting it, you're saying you've reviewed it and you agree to the terms. Purchasing will review for compliance within certain policies, but we're not the ones making the business decision on everything inside of that contract. That's really your department's responsibility. So please make sure that you've read it all, that you understand what your obligations are going to be. Sometimes and I see contracts and the department submits them, and somewhere on page 30, the supplier has said, the UNR is responsible for, and they have this long list of things that you have to turn in by certain dates, or it compromises the whole timeline and they're no longer obligated to deliver the product to you. So please read your whole contract before submitting it and make sure it's something your department can live with. So purchasing's responsibility is to make sure that we're compliant with any regulations. This includes NRS. This includes the Board of Regents Policy Handbook. This includes any institution rules, and our own purchasing policies. So there's some clauses that we consistently see in contracts that are turned in by departments, and it's usually a rush, that slow down everything because we literally can't sign them. That's their indemnification language, which is very strictly regulated by the Board of Regents. Our governing law is often, like, the supplier is based out of Ohio, so they make it Ohio law. We can't accept that. It has to be in Nevada. Their confidentiality term says we can't, share pricing or anything like that. But by public records law, we have to be able to do that. They reject our NCPO terms and conditions. This is especially problematic if any federal funds are involved, because we're required to include a bunch of federal terms. So there's things that we will review in purchasing to make sure that we are following all of the laws and policies that we have to at a purchase. And those are things that often come up as incorrect. Now, I understand most of you probably are not reading and reviewing and accepting contracts on a regular basis. There's a lot of information in different places. And my role has changed recently to focus purely on purchasing contracts for BCN. And part of that will be to develop materials for the departments to understand all the requirements in one place. So right now you kind of have to hunt around. So those tools and materials are coming, and we will share them with you as soon as I can get them developed. But hopefully it will make your lives a little bit easier when you are looking at a contract and considering it for your department, so that when you submit it, it doesn't get delayed for weeks and weeks because further negotiations have to be made. We get to the next slide. Yep. All right. Some language we often will recommend from our side not to accept as risky. One of the things that comes to mind for me is late payments accruing interest fees. We generally recommend that you ask them to remove any late fees or interest fees on late payments. When we issue POs, we're obligating ourselves to make our payments net 30 usually, unless we've agreed to something else. We often will ask for that. So there's things where we make recommendations. You can choose to accept or not accept that. But we will often let you know what best business is for that. FOB destination shipping, oftentimes when there's shipping involved, there's destination or origin shipping, and if the contract says origin shipping, that means that we're responsible for it once it leaves their warehouse. And if we have any issues with the shipper or they damage it, it's kind of our problem. So we always recommend accepting only FOB destination shipping instead. So there's things that are just kind of best practices that aren't necessarily rules. So you don't have to change them if you don't want to, but you'll be accepting more risk as a department if you don't. Also, I want to underscore that just because you get sent, like say you're purchasing some business consulting services and they send you a proposal and they want you to sign the proposal. Just because they send it to you to sign doesn't mean that you have to make the purchase. Actually, more often it even happens with quotes, like you're renting something from Camelot, you're getting some equipment and tables and chairs, and they have a signature space. We usually do not sign anything from Camelot. We just process the purchase and they accept it. So just because you see a place to sign on your method of procurement, your quote or your contract, doesn't mean that they actually necessarily need a signature. So if they don't ask for it, don't push for a signature. That we will process a PO without a signature unless we are explicitly asked to sign it. And the reason for that is that our PO comes with its own terms and conditions. So like I mentioned earlier, contracts can be called all kinds of things. A PO is a contract also from us because it comes with terms and conditions, and those terms and conditions keep us in line with our policy and legal requirements to do a purchase. And so we always want our PO to be the governing contract on a purchase if possible. So just to reiterate, just because there's a place to sign doesn't mean you have to sign for the purchase. It might, but that should be clarified by the supplier. If you do need us to review or sign a contract in purchasing, it needs to become attached to the requisition. We're not allowed to sign anything until the money has been encumbered. And so that's the best method forward. Now, if you anticipate some trouble or a rush, you're always welcome to send it in advance and say the requisition's coming. But I can't give it a formal review until the money is in hand. If there's a rare occasion where you need a contract signed for a P card, that's different. You just reach out and say, this has to be paid by P card and we have to sign it. Can you please review? 2 weeks is our standard review time in purchasing, and that is because often there are other departments that have to be coordinated with. Again, I'm working on materials to help departments be able to line all their ducks up in advance of submitting a requisition with a contract for signature to shorten that time. But right now, often I'll look through the contract and say, oh, this involves software. We're going to have to talk to IT. IT has to review for accessibility and for data security, and that adds time to the review.
Adriel, there were a couple questions in the chat
Oh,
related to that.
thank you. Are we still okay signing applications like room use ones? Can you elaborate? Oh, is the $0 ones? So I don't manage, we don't in purchasing manage $0 contracts. If you, Kara's office does, and if they've authorized internal room use for $0, I'm not aware of that policy, but I would just go with what you've already been told. I will say internal agreements like MOUs between two departments, we don't have to sign those. Those can be signed between the departments. I believe it needs to be the department head for each. But if it's not if it's not us agreeing with an external entity that's not the Nevada System of Higher Education, then the signature rules change a little bit. But anytime we're purchasing from an outside entity, purchasing is the signature authority or the president. Oh.
I unmuted myself. I figured I can't type as fast.
You're fine. Go ahead, Carla.
They're outside entities. It's usually like permit applications for like we use space in some school districts, like in Nye County. The one that started it all was a request to use space at Tamarack.
Okay.
Yep.
That I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I'm not aware of for the $0 contracts. I would just say if the room
Well,
rental includes us paying any money, then it needs to come to purchasing. If it's $0, I'm not sure.
well, it wasn't the zero. Well, for sure, the thing that allowed that where they gave us permission is the application piece. It started with Sherry Mendez. She was there before Kara. It
Mhm.
was something to do with that, where she said, "We don't consider this a contract since it's an application. Your department has authority to sign, even if there's indemnification language." The only guidance we received in the end, when I checked in again about a year ago
Mhm.
with Kara, the only guidance that Melanie said just on the application, just make sure that we make a note of the NRS limits when they reference indemnification.
Uh-huh. That is something that we do on our contracts as well, is we limit it per the NRS. Can I follow up with you after this training? Because I'm just curious in case some of those come our way in the future, how they're handled, and I would love to just confirm with Kara's office too, so I'm communicating clearly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because it's an interesting thing to me because we're always it's pounded in for years. I've been here 20 years,
Yeah,
pounded in. Don't sign. Especially if there's indemnification, all the red flags for
yeah,
don't sign. So for sure, yeah, we
yeah,
can
that'd be
touch
great. Because
base after the
anytime
holidays
we,
and something.
yeah, anytime we can make your life simpler, I would love to do that. So this sounds simpler than having someone else review and sign it and revise everything. But I would love to follow up on that and get some confirmation.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so that actually brings up something just briefly. If you have a contract where we're actually being paid something, that actually gets routed to Kara Griffin's office. She manages income contracts. What that often comes to us on accident as is doing hotel room blocks. Like, say you're having an event and the hotel offers, hey, we'll give you this room block, and anyone who books through this room, we're going to give you a $10 rebate per room. That's actually an income contract, and that gets signed through Kara Griffin's office and not through ours. If it's mixed, where they're getting like a $10 rebate to you, but you're also agreeing to buy 10 rooms for 2 nights, and so we are paying out an amount, then yes, purchasing handles the entire thing if it's a mixed bag. But if it's solely income, it goes to Kara Griffin's office. Okay, so contract flow chart. So essentially, this is how contract would get processed. You would attach it to the requisition. It would go through all the normal budgetary checks, hit purchasing's inbox. The buyer would look at all the attached backup to make sure everything's in there that needs to be in there, including insurance. We're authorized to sign up to 1 million. If everything's fine with the contract and we're able to negotiate what we need to negotiate without general counsel getting involved, then at that point it would be processed as a PO. We would sign the contract, everything would be fine and off to the races. If the contract exceeds $1 million, we can't sign it in-house. It has to go to the president. The president won't sign anything without it going through general counsel's office. So what would happen at that point is the contract, we would hold the requisition and not issue the PO yet. We would route the contract to the general counsel's office. They would also conduct their own formal review before routing it to the president to sign. If it exceeds 3 million, it's still the same beginning process because the chancellor will not sign a contract that has not been recommended to him by the president. The president won't sign a contract that hasn't been recommended to him by his counsel. So we would still submit the contract to general counsel's office with some additional paperwork because they require that when it gets routed to the chancellor, the department has to fill out these additional information sheets for review. So then it would go from the general counsel's office at UNR to the president to recommend to the chancellor. Then it would be routed to the chancellor's office, reviewed by the NSHE council, and then signed by the chancellor. That all gets returned to purchasing, and then we can execute the PO. All right, that's it for me. Does anyone have any more contract questions before we move on? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Adriel. So just to wrap up, because I know we're just a little over time, for the resources, this is just everything we kind of talked about today. So this is links to all the different resources that are out there. I know there was a couple different links that have errors or we need to update. So we'll update those so as you have access to those links will be updated. But one I want to point out is in case you missed me announcing this at Network, under the BCN Purchasing website, under Contact Us, so the About Us and then Contact Us tab, we actually have a list of each buyer's general areas of responsibility. So as you're looking at a requisition or you have a question on a spend category and you just want to know a general area that the buyer will oversee and that you want to contact, you can see that on our Contact Us page. So now we have a nice table of who's responsible for certain areas. So then you can reach out to them and directly contact them to be able to go over if you have a question on spend categories or a question on a requisition or insurance or anything that applies to that requisition, they could be able to help you. And if you happen to get somebody who maybe that's not their area, they'll always direct you to the correct one. If you can't find it through the spend category or through that table, reach out to BCN Purchasing and we'll make sure to connect you with the correct person. But these are all the links to everything that we talked about today. And then this is our contact information. So thank you for joining us today. And I know it's a long training, but we wanted to make sure we provided all the information that we can on purchasing. We'll stick around for a little bit if anybody has any questions or we need to show anybody anything. But thank you so much for attending Purchasing Essentials and take care.